standard. But to move into a leadership position, it's less about what you do and more about how you support others in their success. But that is the exact opposite to what got you here. You usually got here, you might have been liked by people, but you got here based on individual performance. But strategy and being more strategic is actually about the organization's performance and a place that you can take in it, but equally how you position other people to succeed. I suppose one of the biggest challenges for my clients is, how do I move from something that is rewarded, that got me this position, to doing something completely different to succeed in my strategic role? But often they're expected to just make this switch, but the organization doesn't always help them make that switch. So a couple of things. Their managers might still want them to be operational and strategic, which isn't always the role, but it just makes their manager's life easier. Sometimes they're not given the support to learn how to move from one to the other. So they don't know how to measure their success, their strategic successes, because they've only learned how to measure operational success. And I suppose it's the biggest issue is everyone's talking about being strategic. Very few people know how. Understanding strategy is like how the tactics connect to the kind of team aims, but then the team aims connect to the organizational aims, and how every decision needs to take into account a kind of more complex view of the situation rather than technical and tactical. But yet you've only been rewarded for being technical and tactical. How are you going to be able to do that without feeling really, really uncomfortable? And I think that that's one of the things that we don't always tell people who are moved into strategic roles, is that actually this is going to be really uncomfortable moving from that to this. Actually, you're going to probably attempt to micromanage or step in or take on work you don't need to take on just to feel useful, because you haven't learned to value your strategic skills as value add or useful. You only know to think you're valuable when you're the one fixing or doing, so you keep interfering in the processes. Whereas strategically, you want to set up processes that don't need you to intervene, that the people below you help each other, that success happens when you're on holidays. But that's really threatening to your ego if you're like, especially like, and you mentioned working class. So a working class value is work hard, right? It's one of those values that comes with it, right? So what happens when you don't need to stay late? What happens when you don't need to come off your holiday and check your email? You're going to feel threatened. You're going to feel replaceable. Actually, if you're in a strategic role, that means you've done your job really well, but that is going to challenge identity and values. So there's actually quite a bit of work to be done from moving from operational to strategic, and also to be able to explain to other people the value add you have without saying you did things you didn't do. How do I express my value add without bragging about myself or saying that my team's work is my work? Because there's not, like, no team hates that more. And it gets very annoying to hear managers claiming the work of their team when actually they should be claiming that they led their team, that they supported their team, not that they did it. So it does, like, moving from operational to strategic is really hard, but it does require development. And that's what I see happen in organizations. We promote someone, they only have their skill set, and they keep attempting to make everyone do it their way because they don't know how else to do it. So they can't move into a strategic mindset because they're so busy in the detail of doing in the way that they like to do it, that they're not actually being strategic, but they're not being helped to learn how to be strategic either. People just think, oh, well, you were good at that, so now you'll be good at this. I can tell you, like, this supervising scooping ice cream is not the same as scooping ice cream. Just like teaching is not the same as doing. Strategically leading isn't the same as operationally managing. So to give that promotion without the supports is actually setting everyone up to fail.
Yeah.
The first things I do when someone's moving from operational to strategic is we kind of develop some very clear, like, KPIs, for want of a better frame. Like, how are we going to measure your success in the strategic role? Because otherwise we make up crap that doesn't add value. You know, so like one of my big questions is, how does that intervention add value? And people are like, oh, well, if I oversee it, I'll be like, how does it take value? So when you ask those two questions, you start to find out very quickly if your decision making is more about your comfort than about the results, or whether actually you're intervening appropriately. You've just set up a system that works so well that you don't need to do 38 touch hours a week. And like, remember that those kind of like 25 hours or whatever, they are touch hours. That means that you are thinking the other hours, which is what you need from a strategic person. You need someone who's thinking about problems, preempting, being innovative, considering solutions, trying to make people's lives easier. So if you're 38, 40 hours a week or touch hours, you're not being strategic. It's not possible, because strategy involves thinking, complex thinking, which involves not having touch hours. So a strategic role and operational role have different values, but a strategic role needs a promotion, needs a pay rise when you're able to create space for the strategic thinking, and your system is working well and outperforming other systems, like the people are outperforming other, that's a pay rise. That's not trying to fill those hours, because you're ignoring unconsciously that those hours of not being in contact with people might actually be where you're problem solving best, not under pressure, where you're able to see meta views because you're not in the detail with people. And so, yeah, so that's a pay rise opportunity when it comes to a strategic role, which is why, like, and we all know this, there are people who are in strategic roles who do F all and drive people mad, right? And they're terrible leaders. Yes, that happens. But there are people who are in strategic roles who you see can have a coffee with people, and people are like, it's grand for some. They're working. That coffee is work. You know, they're going out for those drinks, they're going out for lunch. That's work. You might not, it's not work in an operational sense, but it is in a strategic sense. So you have to have different measures for success. Now, if I'm working with an operational manager, this is not what we're talking about. You know what I mean? So like, this isn't true for operational, but we have to see that different KPIs for both, and you have to help someone understand them for them to be able to adequately measure their success. So from an organizational development perspective, I like to use a dialogic approach, which is a conversational approach. So I think it's more than communication. I think set your organization. So I think there's nothing wrong with senior managers setting the direction of the organization. I think that's appropriate. But I think that what needs to happen next is a conversation at each level about how that level can contribute to that goal, not communication. There's a difference between telling someone how they can and asking them to input versus having a conversation. So for me, if you're going to go to the effort of strategic goals, you need to have a method in which you are able to have conversations with people responsible for the delivery of it so that they can inform the most strategic way from their perspective, even an operational role. So here's an example. You might say, my team can make 10 million in sales this year. You decided as a manager, because you know you get a 2% bonus for every sale, right? So you're like, we'll do 10 million because you've worked out what your bonus is. But because nobody's talked to your team, what they don't know is that you're overworking your team and they're about to all turn over in the next year. They're about to leave, right? So you set a goal that is financially beneficial for you, but because that nobody's talked to your team are saying that is not an achievable goal for us. What is achievable is this. Now, don't get me wrong, there's always stretches, like people are always going to do what's comfortable. So I'm not saying you go, oh, that's exactly what we do. But because we haven't talked to your team, we're not getting a real understanding. And there's some really big organizations at the moment. There's one in particular that I have in mind that has taken away time cards because they said, look, we trust you to do the work. It has set every middle manager up to exploit their team, and they haven't even copped it yet. And their teams are leaving them. They're all out there looking for new jobs because the organization was like, this is a really good method of trusting our staff, which technically it is. But what they've actually done is set up a position where middle managers can now look like that they're providing the results that they promised that are unreasonable, but they're exploiting their staff, and they're now losing their staff. So there's a real issue here with not talking to the levels responsible for delivery. Now, there are some really big organizations, like international ones, that's not as practical. You can't talk to everyone. But what you can do is you can pick, like, I call it like a stream, and you get the stream to some degree to do that. And then next year you get a different stream. But really, you shouldn't be doing a strategy for 1 year. You should be doing it for about 5, right? Because strategies are long-term things. So I think some critical thinking up front, and then dialogic approaches, conversation. You can either set up formal conversations where you go down a line of the business, or you can set up informal where you give people grades and you say, you can come and talk to us at this grade. So you might have to say, right, A's are entry-level people, B's are this, C's are middle managers. You know, you might have to do it that way, and then do an open call for people to come to the conversation. But I do think that you need conversations. And I think that's the biggest gap between people in positions of power making decisions that are good for them, which ultimately undermine the organization's sustainable success. And also, they'll tell you about the problems you don't know about. So like, if you have an OD team, brilliant. If you have a HR team and an OD section, this will be normal for OD practitioners to do. Organizational development practitioners. Basically, you are going to see problems you know nothing about that will become really big problems in the next year, 2 years, 3 years. You will see them by having these conversations, and you can do something with them. Whereas what a lot of people are doing is like top down, giving people frameworks that don't work, and then putting individuals on pips, being like, your performance isn't good enough. And the individual is trying to tell you, I'm working 70-hour weeks. I keep making mistakes because I can't keep up with what's being asked of me, not because I'm insufficient, but because actually our department is stretched, because our manager is driving me nuts, because like there could be loads of reasons. Somebody I care about passed away. So I think what we need to do is realize that there is value from the ground up, not just top down. So I think that like we could use more of that ground up understanding, because there is intelligence on your entry level staff right up to the senior board that could earn you money and prevent problems. That's what strategy is about, is understanding how to use all of that, how to distill that into useful information. Whereas operational is how to get them to do it, whatever it is that you've decided.